A water effect rises to color in the state of California Department of Water Resources seal. A woman stands behind a podium. Text, Tanya Carloni, facilitator.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. Those of you who have made the trip to Sacramento, we really appreciate that. And I'd like to welcome those who are joining us on our webcast this afternoon. As we go through today's agenda, I'll make sure that we provide you information with how you can submit any questions during this webcast, and we'll also talk about how to submit any comments that you may have about basin boundary modifications on the portal. So again, thank you for being here at DWR's Basin Boundary Modification public meeting. Today, the department is going to provide you with an overview of the draft basin boundary modifications and run you through the technical process, and you will then have an opportunity to ask questions. Depending on how many questions and comments we receive today, we may institute a time limit, but I'll let you know as the meeting goes forward if we will actually have a time limit. Okay, so again, I thank you very much for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Dane Mathis, who will give you a quick introduction, and then we'll continue with the presentation. Following the presentation, again, we will have a period for questions for clarification that pertains specifically to the presentation that Chris Olvera is going to give today. Once we finish with those questions for clarification, we will open a public comment session, and you all received speaker cards, these little cards here, and if you would like to make a comment today, I will collect these and call you up to make your comments up here at the podium in the order that I received your comments. So I'll keep coming out to you and asking if you would like to make a comment, and I'll make sure I collect those cards. I do already have a few of them. Also, my colleague Stephanie Horry, sitting back here, is taking notes, and she will be capturing your verbal comments today. The department would really like for you to submit whatever comment you have on the portal, but if you have any information that backs up your verbal comments today, please give those to me, and we'll make sure that they get included in the record. All right, thank you again for being here, and I'll pass it over to Dane.
Dane Mathis, DWR Supervising Engineering Geologist.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. And welcome everybody that's in the room and viewing on the webcast on behalf of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Program. There's many, we just have a few in the room today and also a handful of DWR staff. So I just wanted to, for those DWR staff, if you could raise your hand so everyone knows that you're here and potentially available for Q&A either during the session or after the meeting is over. And firstly, I'd like to thank all of the local agencies that took the time and the resources to develop the request to submit to the department to modify a basin boundary. And this project is one of a handful of priority projects for the department, the others being alternative reviews and basin prioritization. And just note that there's more work to be done after basin boundaries are modified, but once they are, the department is required to reassess basin priority. We'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. And that in turn establishes areas that might eventually be subject to the requirements of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So we're looking forward to completing these projects so agencies can really implement their necessary planning needed to develop the groundwater sustainability plans and eventually implement them.
Basin Boundaries Map.
The team has been working pretty diligent and on an expedited time frame, certainly within the last 2 months after the submission period closed at the end of September. And as the lead for the project, I was really fortunate to be working with a core group of very diligent and dedicated professionals that really put a lot of quality time into this project and our draft recommendations. And there was a lot of people on the team, but I certainly want to thank the region office staff in our 4 region offices because they have the place-based knowledge and the local expertise that really put in a lot of quality contributions to the project. I want to thank you again for attending in person and also for those on the webcast. And we all look forward to fielding and addressing your questions and certainly hearing your comments on our draft decisions. Next up will be Chris Olvera, another key component to the project, and I'll walk you through a summary of the project and our draft decisions.
Chris Olvera, DWS Engineering Geologist.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Chris Olvera. I'm with South Central Region Office, and I'm an engineering geologist with that particular group. So I'm going to be talking to you about our basin boundary modification requests and how we were able to go ahead and complete this. One of the things I'm going to be a few things I'm going to be talking about is going to be the history of Bulletin 118, what are basins, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, Basin Boundary Regulations, and Basin Boundary Modifications 2018, and also the next steps following.
Images of report cover pages.
Let's start off with the development of California's groundwater basins and subbasins. The basins were first defined in 1952 with the report, and then further the Bulletin 118, 1975 created the California's groundwater. In those reports, they had delineated water basins and then used the best scientific data in order to better delineate those water basins. Other things that came into play were the introduction of subbasins and also identified those basins that are in critical overdraft. Within Bulletin 118 Interim Update 2016, it did take into account of the 2016 Basin Boundary Modification requests that were approved and put into the Bulletin 118 Interim Update 2016.
Diagrams of marked groundwater basin and subbasin.
Groundwater basin definition. So what is a groundwater basin? A groundwater basin is an alluvial aquifer or a stacked series of alluvial aquifers with reasonably well-defined boundaries in a lateral direction and having a definable bottom. As depicted on the right-hand side in that illustration, that blue line indicates a scientific boundary where the alluvium meets the hard rock. Groundwater subbasin is created by dividing a groundwater basin into smaller units using geologic, hydrologic barriers, or institutional boundaries. And those lines are depicted on the bottom portion of that illustration on the right-hand side in red, which could be either institutional or hydrologic barriers.
Photo of Governor Jerry Brown signing a bill.
In 2014, the historic groundwater legislation, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, was signed. And that was in recognition that groundwater management in California was best accomplished locally. This applies to all groundwater basins, Bulletin 118 groundwater basins, as defined by Bulletin 118. It set forth a few things as far as having powers, new powers and responsibilities given to agencies. It also required that the Bulletin 118 basins to be covered by a plan. So, the area of the plan was critical, which is the reason why the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act established a process for local agencies to ask DWR to revise those boundaries of existing groundwater basins or subbasins, including establishing new subbasins. So how does this help? It more accurately defines the boundaries to best manage and monitor those resources. That can be done by possibly alluvial maps, new geologic maps. The other thing is it allows agencies to continue previous management work with neighboring local agencies and beneficial users. And maybe not even just existing, but sometimes creating new relationships within agencies that have possibly similar challenges and similar goals, and which they can pool their resources to achieve those goals and answer those challenges.
Diagram showing new boundaries at fault and county lines.
The categories of the modifications that are available are scientific, for one. Scientific revision is a basin boundary consists of a addition or deletion or relocation of a boundary based on the geologic or hydrologic conditions that define the basin. The picture on the right, you can see that there may be a hydrologic barrier caused by a fault, and a new boundary could be snapped to that fault line. The other thing that a scientific basin boundary does is that you can actually change the outside extent of that basin by following newer, more precise geologic maps. Internal jurisdictional boundary revision refers to any boundary modification that would adjust the location of a boundary between a subbasin within a basin or the shared boundary between the adjacent basin. The illustration on the right hand of this side shows the existing basin as depicted on the river. And instead of having that river being the boundary between Basin A and Basin B, it then snaps to the county line. The advantage of that may be that the county can then concentrate its resources on one basin rather than having it split between multiple basins.
Consolidated and divided sample revision diagrams.
Basin consolidation refers to any boundary modification that would reduce the number of subbasins within a basin or merge two or more adjacent basins, but would change only shared boundaries and would not change the external boundary of any basin or subbasin. So the consolidation here you can see on the right, there are two basins, A and B, A being in the north, B being in the south, and three agencies, agencies A, B, and C. And they may be wanting to work together to create a plan or to manage the basin together. So removal of that basin boundary and creating one solid basin within that area would allow them to do such. Basin subdivision. That refers to any boundary modification that would increase the number of subbasins within a basin or subbasin. Here we have an entire existing basin. We can just call it Basin A. And we have agencies A, B, and C. And these agencies may feel that they have a unique area in which to manage, and it might be best managed separately. So then creating a boundary within this basin and creating multiple subbasins in which those agencies can then work on their own plans within their own subbasin.
A table of requirements for submittal and approval process.
So the regulations also provided, this is a framework of those regulations. What I really want to illustrate here is that with the different types of boundary modifications, there are certain requirements. Some of those requirements are unified with all of them, such as agency information and resolution, also notification and consultation. And some of them are unique to certain types of categories. One of those being the supported by 75% of agencies and systems that are required for the jurisdictional subdivision. Other things that are worth note are the blue arrows in which they show opportunities for stakeholder input. And I can go over the different opportunities that were present within this process later on in some other slides here.
Web-based request records and map tools.
DWR also provided some modification tools for those agencies and the public to utilize. One of those that were developed was the Basin Boundary Modification Request System, or BBMRS. What you can do on that is the agency can submit the request. Also, the public can view the submittal of the request once it's marked complete. DWR can run an assessment through BBMRS and initial notifications that a potential request will be coming in, and communications between the department and the requesting agency can be done through this system. The Basin Boundary Assessment Tool, or BBAT, will allow mapping as a mapping tool. Allows Bulletin 118 basin boundaries to be viewed. Also, you can view geologic maps, county boundaries. You can also import things such as township and ranges, and also fault maps.
Map showing color-coded proposed modification lines.
So the Basin Boundary Modification, in 2015, the California Water Commission approved the Basin Boundary Modification Regulations. In 2016, the Boundary Modification Round 1 went through. Within that within round one, there was 54 requests that were received. 39 were approved and 15 were denied. In 2018, boundary modifications started. It was a 9-month submission period, which was extended due to public comments. The initial notification opened in July 2017, and the submission period closed September 28th, 2018.
Figure on stairs which represent review steps.
For the 2018 basin boundary modification, the department developed an evaluation process. When the agency was submitting a request, the DWR commenced its completeness review. And what that did was, the purpose of that was to ensure that the requirements were met as per the regulations. If those requirements were met, the department would then mark it complete and would be available for the public to see, and then the department would start its technical review. The technical review consisted of 2 or more personnel, DWR personnel. Typically, it was the local region office staff as well as other DWR personnel to help evaluate this. Once the evaluation was complete, the senior office, the region office senior review would start, and that would play onto the local knowledge of the senior local regional office. Once that was complete, the SGMO program review would also review every single one of the boundary modification requests. And once all those were complete, a presentation with a team meeting would review each modification and come up with a team or a unified decision on that. And that would help with statewide consistency as well.
A map showing 2018 draft modifications.
So in 2018, there were 43 requests received. The types of requests were 23 jurisdictional, 15 scientific, and 5 that were a combination of both jurisdictional and scientific.
Maps of regional requests.
As per region office, the Northern Region Office received 9 and had 14 affected basins. South Central Region Office had 11 requests come in with 13 affected basins. North Central Region Office had 12 with 14 affected basins, and Southern Region Office had 11 requests come in with 10 affected basins. After the review process was completed, a summary of decisions was completed. 33 of those 43 were approved, 7 were denied, and then 3 were approved with denied portions. And the table can be found on the Basin Boundary DWR website. Opportunities for public comment. So there's a few opportunities during this process in which the public can comment. One of them was during the requesting agency's required notice and consultation. Also, when the agency submitted and the completeness review was completed and the submission was marked as complete, the public also had 30 days in which to review and comment. After the release of the Basin Boundary Modification draft release, there is a public meeting that's going on today in which you could make a comment, and also during on the DWR website. And then that ends January 4th, 2019. There's also going to be a presentation to the California Water Commission on January 16th, 2019, in which public comment could be made.
sgmps@water.ca.gov.
If you wish to make a public comment on the DWR website, go to the Basin Boundary Modification page on the DWR website. You want to select submit a new public comment. There you're able to fill in the required information and also upload documents that you feel are necessary to complete your comment. Those comments are going to be publicly viewable. And also during this meeting, a public comment meeting, you can actually fill out the comment cards, or you can submit do your comment verbally.
Timeline and table of events and dates leading to release.
So the next steps, we have the end of this 30-day comment period, which again ends in January 4th, 2019. There's going to be we're going to present to the California Water Commission. on January 16th, 2019, and then the final modifications will be released in February 2019.
Prioritization timeline and table.
And how the basin boundary modifications and basin prioritization relate. So the basin prioritization based on the 2018 basin boundary modifications, the release of draft prioritizations late February. Public comment period is going to be February to March, and then the release of final prioritization based on 2018 boundary modifications is going to be on the May 2019. Dates subject to change.
sgma.water.ca.gov.
For more information on basin boundary modifications, please visit the Basin Boundary website. Also, the SGMO portal, if you want the Basin Boundary Modification Request System, if you want to review certain modification requests that were submitted. And any questions, contact our program lead, Dane Mathis. Thank you.
Dane.mathis@water.ca.gov. Tanya Carloni speaks.
Thank you, Chris. There was just a little delay there. So now we'd like to take any questions that you have related to the presentation. This really is questions for clarification. And then once we finish with those questions, we will open up the public comment period, where I'll ask for your speaker cards and I'll invite you to come up to the podium in the order that I received those cards. The DWR panel that's assembling now will be able to answer some questions that you have. This will be your opportunity to have that dialogue with DWR, as they will not respond during the comment period. I'd like to introduce you to a couple of other people who are involved in this process. Joya, if you could raise your hand there, Emmerd, is going to be fielding the questions that come in via the webcast. So those of you on the webcast, we will not be taking comments during the comment period via this webcast, but you do have an opportunity to submit any questions for clarification that pertain directly to the presentation that Chris gave, and you can do that at the SGMP email address that's listed there. And so I'll first take questions in the room, and then I'll turn to Joya and see what's coming through the email, just to give those of you on the webcast some time to submit those questions, to write them and send them in. Okay, so coming to the room, are there any questions pertaining specifically to the presentation that Chris gave? And remember that people on the webcast can't hear you unless you're speaking into a microphone, so please wait for me to come to you and I'll bring you the mic. Any questions on that presentation? Yes, you'll bear with me. I'm just going to come behind you and give you the mic.
Good afternoon, Harry Starkey with West Kern Water District, and we submitted a basin boundary modification that was denied. And I'm just curious about the decision staircase that you presented. The last step was a communication process, and I'm wondering, does DWR issue any kind of internal memo that provides the applicant who was denied an understanding as to why it was denied? And I think that's important because obviously we want to be persuasive in submitting comments by January 4th, and we'd really like to kind of focus our comments accordingly.
Tanya hands the mic to Dane Mathis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Starkey. Not at this time. We don't have formal write-ups for the draft decisions, but we will produce those after we do the final decisions. But what's available to you and other agencies is to have a conversation and to meet with DWR staff. And for your particular request, that's already been done, but we're happy to do that again if you think it'd be helpful.
I think that would be, just so that we can, I mean, hopefully we understood that there was at least some healthy internal debate as to our application, and so we'd like to try to be persuasive with those people that were in the dissenting camp. We worked really hard on this. It's very important to us, and obviously we think it's scientifically justified, and so appreciate the availability of every decision maker along that tree if we could. And so I think we would like to request that I know it's going to be tough around the holidays, so, but we appreciate you guys making yourself available in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe that Dane is your primary contact there, and his contact information is included in the presentation. Is that correct, Dane? Okay. Thank you for that question. Other questions from the audience, and then I'm going to go over to Joya and see if there's anything coming in via the webcast. Other questions in the audience? Okay, Joya, any questions coming in?
I do not have any, but I will let people know that we don't have any questions at this time coming via the mailbox. But if people have questions after the presentation, they can certainly email that box and we will respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Joya. All right, one last call here in the audience. If there are questions pertaining to the presentation, and if not, I will go ahead and transition to the public comment period. Okay, having heard none, let me just say a couple of things about how to submit public comment. Chris did provide you with an overview. I'd like to introduce you to Vivian Gaxiola, who's here. And for those of you who are interested in the room, who are interested in receiving a demonstration on how to submit public comments via the portal, she is available to you after today's meeting, and we'll take you through that process. Okay, so regarding the public comments, I have received several comment cards. Is there anyone who has yet to give me one who would like to make a comment? I'll come to you. And you have one too, Joy. I'll come to you in a moment. Thanks a lot. Anyone else with a speaker card who's yet to turn that in? And Joya, did you have a clarifying question? Let's go back to that.
Okay. If a basin boundary is altered via a jurisdictional change, will the basin be reprioritized? For instance, if adjacent basins are reconfigured. And this comes from Rick Rogers.
Dane takes the mic.
So yes, the question is, for any time there's a basin boundary modification, the department is required to reassess the basin's priority. So generally on an internal jurisdictional change, that involves at least two basins. So yes, both basins will be subject to reassessment of priority.
Stephen Springhorn takes mic.
Okay, thank
Just
you.
One thing
Rick.
to add
Yes,
to that,
Stephen?
as Chris mentioned in the presentation, those basins that were modified, the goal is to get final priorities out by May 2019. So all those basins, it's 59 basins that were either directly modified or affected by modifications. Those would be final in May 2019.
Thank you, Stephen. Anything else, Joya? Okay, one more question. Sorry, we're flip-flopping here a little bit, but let's take these questions because we have the time for it. Joya?
Okay. Many environmental and community groups supported the basin boundary proposal for the Shasta Basin. Can you explain why this expansion of the basin was denied? I know that it expanded beyond the alluvial basin, but did so to incorporate a significant source of basin recharge. And this question comes from Jennifer Clary.
Dane takes the mic.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for the question. This is a modification request from Siskiyou County to expand the existing basin boundary for Shasta Valley. And the request included expanding into areas of geologic deposits that consist of volcanic material. And the information provided with the request wasn't specific enough to meet the definition and the regulations with respect to aquifer material. So there was a little bit of disconnect there with the particular request.
Thank you, Dane. Thank you, Jennifer. Anything else, Joya, before we go to public comment?
Not right now, but
Okay.
more might come in. There might be a little delay.
Okay, all right. All right, so let's go ahead and take public comments. Again, just to remind you that the department won't respond to your comments. Whoops, I just dropped a couple cards, sorry. And please, when you make your comments, please come up to the podium. And a reminder to those on the webcast, we will not be taking public comments from the SGMP email address, just questions. However, you can make comments on the portal by the January 4th deadline. So when you come up, those of you who are in the room to make your comments, if you could just provide your name and your affiliation, please direct your comments to the department. And if possible, please provide any specific basin boundary modification information and that pertains to your comments, so be as specific as possible. And please realize that I may impose a time limit, but at presently, I think that we don't have that many comments, but please do try to be specific and in your comments. Okay, I think that's it. So let's go ahead and call Ben King from King Golden State, I think it's Orchards, to the podium, referring to the Butte and Colusa Basin modifications.
Thank you for your time and for this opportunity and for all the good intention for push for sustainable groundwater management for the state of California. I'm a landowner from Colusa County. I grew up in the city of Colusa, right next to the river, right next to the bridge. As proposed, I can literally straddle the proposed Butte Basin and Colusa Basin. My orchard off River Road right south of the Colusa Weir is just adjacent to RD 1004, which is proposed to be part of the new Butte Basin. And so that'd be my right foot, and my left foot would be in the Colusa Basin, which would go and include all the permanent plantings on the west side of the valley, all supported by Tehama-Colusa Canal. So I have a couple general contents, and that my main substantive content is I do not think that this proposed separation, partition of the Colusa County. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so is this good? Yeah. So I do not believe that the proposed partition of the Colusa County portion of the current West Butte Basin makes sense on a scientific basis. I think it goes contrary to many hydrological, hydrochemical, tectonic, all variety of reasons, primarily because it's all adjacent to the Sutter Buttes, which I would say is the stakeholder process has been a evolving process for me, and I've taken it rather seriously, but where I am now is different than where I started. And as I get deeper in this, and perhaps it's just because of my passion about it, I see more complexity. But on a scientific basis, I think it's clear that the Sutter Buttes is its own structural domain from a geological point of view, since it is a ancient volcano that was one time 7,000 feet high, spilled lava, and has worn down over time to about 2,000 feet. And from a hydromorphic basis, so the hydrogeochemistry is unique, possibly with the presence of coconut seawater coming up from the ancient seawater, from a fault, a structure, or some type of structural I guess weakness around the Sutter Buttes. There's and I've cited this in my comments, and I apologize for the typos in my comments, but I cited this. This was also referred to a 1984 USGS report. The theory is that you have a fracture and that you have vertical movement of salt water. Empirically, in the comments for Colusa County, there was one landowner that reported that a domestic well at the Colusa Shooting Club on Laux Road actually has reverse osmosis. And then anecdotally, a landowner who is next to a person who's transferring water from the Colusa County portion of the West Butte Basin through the Glen Colusa to the Tehama-Colusa Canal, put in a deep well and came up with salt water 500 feet down. So, empirically, based on what I know, but I have not backed it up, I believe there's got to be salt water somewhere where a domestic well would, at least 500 feet. So the depth of the area around the Colusa Basin, I think, is unknown. The Butte proposal, the scope of the groundwater management plan for the Butte proposal did not include anything about Colusa County. It's limited to Butte Basin. The work done by the hydrologic conceptual model by Davids and Yost, referred to as just preliminary in its matter. The Colusa County groundwater management plan leaves a bunch of open questions, and primarily around the Sutter Buttes. And in the geological reports of state, they mentioned the presence of the Colusa Dome, the buried Colusa Buttes. So it's the area that is known, the area to the west of the Sutter Buttes between Colusa and the city of Colusa. I don't think we know the depths of that aquifer. There may be a presence of connate seawater. I'm concerned about pumping compression, the lateral movement of that contaminant. The Willows Fault runs somewhere between the Sutter Buttes and the city of Colusa and the city of Grimes. And to the northeast, we have probably one of the most important groundwater dependent ecosystems of the the Butte Sink, Gray Lodge, Butte Lodge, some of the most diverse aqua and fauna in the world, with a presence possibly seawater coming up from ancient aquifers. And then we have the groundwater dependent cities of Colusa. We have Grimes, where there's already a presence of arsenic. So to the extent that there's any translocation of this contaminate, both for the ecological groundwater dependent ecosystems or the groundwater dependent municipality of Colusa, it could be significant. So to the extent that there are more water transfers on the east side of the river in the newly proposed Colusa Basin and cause more groundwater pumping because of transfers going to the west side, I think we have a more potential for lateral movement of this contaminant. And then also to the extent we have that, just the ecological damage to a very precious resource. So, and then finally, we have iron and manganese in the groundwater of Colusa right now, and also sulfur. So where the Sutter Buttes, where the Colusa Dome ends, and that depth of that area, how that may affect the Colusa water quality. Finally, and this is one of the comments that I got to my last of my report. So I basically just went through and read this report and this footnote and this report and this footnote. And the most significant is there was a lot of work done in the area from a tectonic basis after the Oroville earthquake, which occurred on August 1st, 1975. And we saw some movement up by Orland, actually at the surface area. So we have to acknowledge that with all this new development going on in permanent crops in areas where they weren't have before, and to the extent that we are in a clearly where we had tectonic activity, and in the latest research that I've seen, a 1999 paper actually believes that the subsidence has been caused what we are susceptible to subsidence because of tectonic compression. I think we have to look at this context, look at what we're doing from that point of view, that possibility, and how that may affect things vertically and laterally from a geological point of view. So, for all those reasons, I would just add you to take another look at the Sutter Buttes and how you decide to partition the current West Butte Basin. My personal opinion is that it'd be better to have one hydrological geomodel, and my sense is that it'd be better to have that part of the proposed Butte Basin, keep the West Butte Basin intact, because frankly, I like the stakeholders on that side of the river. I like the idea that we're going to be involved with Butte County. I like the idea we're going to have urban and environmental justice people involved versus something dominated basically by West Side water interests going forward. So I ask that. So on a procedural basis, I find, I've spent time looking at the stakeholder guidelines. I looked at best management practices. I looked at the UC Berkeley paper that has several guidelines on how you identify stakeholder involvement, and I quoted that. And then there was also by the Freshwater Trust about stakeholder engagement. And I think it's very difficult. This process has been very difficult because it's so complex and so many people don't care until it's probably too late. I see it really as sort of a locally, and I say SGMO as a locally enforced adjudication in a lot of ways. You know, and that's why the basin boundary modifications are so important, because that's how our groundwater sustainability plans are being made. It's kind of chicken and the egg. And so, but where you start out is going to depend who actually is going to rely on who do this adjudication process. And the adjudication process is really going to be dependent on who has the power and how these local GCAs are formed. So the Butte GCAs are, you know, especially around the city, are going to involve like local domestic use, you know, and some other places you have to be a resident. So like Colusa County, you have to be a resident to even be on the Groundwater Commission. You know, it's very limited. Small towns, not too many people voting for supervisors. You can win unopposed with 500 votes and control some of the most precious water and structure in the whole world. So around that, so I say one thing is just, I believe that going forward, I think it'd be better for this process if we had something like a LAFCO process where actually neighbors are engaged in it and you tie in the administrative code versus just the general provisions. I don't know where the public information parts or freedom of information comes in, but just one substantive material thing about this is that we actually, the RD 1004 was debating whether or not to try to be part, it was trying to, the Colusa County GCA wanted them to be part of the Colusa Basin. At the end, they decided to be part of the Butte Basin when the Butte Basin was proposed late in the game. There was in my understanding, there was actually a mediation by Dave Sepos from the Center of Collaborative Policy. I asked for that to be made public, and it wasn't. I think it was a material omission to disclosure. You know, obviously, a very large waterholder group decided not to be part of the Colusa Basin, and I think it'd be material for the stakeholders to know why. And secondly, is that in the submission by Mary Fahey, who's from Colusa County, done great work. You know, I think she's in a difficult situation. You know, she mentions a couple of things, but be clear there was not a mailing. Butte County sent out a mailing of 6,000 people. Colusa County sent out no mailing at all. And she also included and this is minutia, but it happens because of just the process. She included a reference to what's called a sod buster article of the Colusa County Farm Bureau. That publication was not even published after the 30-day period ended. So, you know, so basically on a substantive basis, I'd like to highlight that, you know, you should take a special look at the Sutter Buttes and think how that affects sustainable groundwater management within a tectonic complex. And secondly, I think procedurally, Colusa County hasn't met the standard to move forward. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ben. Okay, our second speaker, please come to the front of the room, is Harry Starkey from the West Kern Water District.
Raise his hand.
Okay, thank you. Harry has said, for those of you on the webcast, that his issue was addressed during the question and answer, so he would not like to make a comment at this time. Thank you, Harry. The third speaker is Daryl Eck from the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority regarding the South American Sub-Basin. Thank you, Mr. Eck. Come on up to the microphone. Again, please make your comments that are relevant to the basin boundary modification process for the South American Sub-Basin.
Thank you. My name is Daryl Eck. I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority. And on behalf of SCGA, I would like to thank the department for the opportunity to be able to provide a comment. My comment is directed at the application from Slough House Resource Conservation District. SCGA opposed a previous attempt at this proposed basin boundary modification in 2016 and continues to oppose it today. SCGA supports the draft decision made by DWR to deny the proposed basin boundary modification requested by Slough House and hopes that this will ultimately be the final decision. That's my comment. Thank you.
Daryl steps away from the podium.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Our next speaker is Hans-Peter Walter from Slough House RCD. Thank you for coming up to the microphone.
Thank you. I'd like to echo the appreciation of the districts and really all Californians in the efforts DWR is making to help implement SGMA, a real sea change in California water law. I'm an attorney who represents the Slough House Resource Conservation District. They wanted me to come and provide some comments on the draft decision denying the basin boundary modification application, the one that was just mentioned by the previous speaker, for the Cosumnes sub-basin and the South American basin. Just, I assume that the folks who need to be here at DWR are familiar with that basin boundary modification, so I won't waste time trying to describe the physical nature of it, only in as much as I may refer to that as why the district believes that the modification is justified and should be granted. I do first, however, want to just perhaps provide a point of clarification. When I looked at the draft decision table that DWR prepared, that in the final column on the right provides the basis for denial, kind of an abbreviated summary basis. When I look at the two bases provided for the BBM application that Slough House and Omeechobee-Hartnell Water District also jointly submitted, I see that the regulation section 345.2G was cited, which is that there was an objection by an exclusive local agency. I presume that that reference is to the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority that just spoke. I was kind of scratching my head because I believe that regulatory language in 345.2G subdivision 3 is intended and actually verbatim mirrors the statutory language in Water Code section 10,723C1, 10723C1, which is the SGMA provision that created the exclusive, essentially exclusive agencies that would be GSAs for particular areas, the listing of whatever it was, 25 or 30. Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency comes to mind as one of those listed. So the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority is not such an exclusive agency. It wasn't created by statute. It's a joint powers authority that predominantly has, I believe, a 15, maybe a 17-member board, predominantly dominated by seats that the County of Sacramento controls, and then urban interests such as cities and urban water suppliers like Cal American. That's basically one of the reasons the basin boundary change was submitted, is that entity, the SCGA, is really controlled by urban interests, and the Cosumnes Subbasin and Omeechobee-Hartnell Water District and Slough House Resource Conservation District, who are currently split jurisdictionally by the current boundary, view themselves and are traditionally more representative of the agricultural, rural landowner, land use types and constituents that are within the southern portion of Sacramento County, the Cosumnes Subbasin, and those slight areas north that the district would like to have in the Cosumnes Subbasin that predominantly are just the northern part of the Cosumnes River, riparian lands, and agricultural lands. So getting back to that, I don't think that 345.2G fits the bill here as an exclusive agency, because SCGA is not one of those exclusive agencies in the Water Code. And just another point of clarification, the area we're talking about in terms of where the boundary would be shifted, where we would desire to be shifted, is in GSA overlap still today between Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority, Omeechobee-Hartnell Water District, and I think just those two, actually. I think Slough House, and Slough House Resource Conservation District. So you've got three-way overlap or two-way overlap in most of that, so no entity is exclusive of anything right now in that area. So that was just kind of a point of clarification I would urge DWR to just look at that again, if that was a significant factor in denying the coming out with the draft denial of the application. So dovetailing then to the second reason that the change may limit the opportunity or likelihood of sustainable groundwater management. This is really, I think the previous speaker mentioned, or earlier speaker mentioned chicken and egg. This is really an eye of the beholder chicken and egg issue, the districts believe. And the main contention here, and you see it today, there was no coordination. I had no idea that anyone from Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority would be here kind of to try to put the nails in the coffin of the basin boundary modification. It's a very contentious issue, though, and it is right in the backyard here, so it's not too hard to come and present in person to DWR and maybe try to elaborate on just the bare text that you folks received. But we've got a real contentious issue and kind of an agricultural, rural versus urban type of an issue going on, kind of a template, if you will, of a classic resource allocation and stakeholder dispute that's playing out in other places in the state as well along those same stakeholder lines. What kind of informs or modifies the dispute here, which serves as kind of a foundation for the basin boundary modification, is the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority predominantly tried to circumvent the standard SGMA GSP preparation process, which would have involved a lot of coordination and collaboration about the boundary and flow and which way does river recharge run and north to south, by submitting an alternative plan very quickly and swiftly in the process, which was not really because of the speed of that alternative submittal process predominantly, but also perhaps some of the procedures. There wasn't really any opportunity for stakeholders in the Cosumnes to even understand, and those rural landowners and others who really align themselves with the agricultural rural folks more in the Slough House and Omeechobee Cosumnes side of the divide where the districts would like to have it moved. They couldn't really get their hands around it, and there was the potential for an alternative plan to just be placed on the South American basin. And then a lot of statements, and you still see them in the opposition comments by Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority, that essentially the numbers that they already have from almost 20 years ago are the numbers that everybody has to still stick with today. There's not going to be a re-examination. It would be a parade of horribles or a Pandora's box to actually implement SGMA and do an open, scientifically credible, stakeholder-involved process to come up with GSPs on both sides of the basin boundary. And so Slough House has opposed the alternative submittal. So did a lot of other entities, including Department of Fish and Game. It hasn't come out yet, and there's a tremendous amount of unease and distrust in the Cosumnes about the process going on and about things being foisted on the rural landowners in the southern part of the county by essentially an urban-dominated joint powers authority who has a lot of resources and has been around and has been doing a lot of good work. I'm not here to disparage them entirely. I'm trying to convey the distrust that folks in the Cosumnes who haven't been as involved have, and what some of this process and lack of outreach by Sac Central has created. And the basin boundary was a way to try to ward that off by sending a message to Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority that these rural landowners and constituents will be more directly represented and more adequately represented by aligned interests by the Cosumnes Group, which is a group of 7 GSAs that's working on a GSP for the Cosumnes Basin, and received $1 million grant and has come up with more than $1 million, $1.5 million in shared funding. So you got a $2.7 million process that's unfolding in the Cosumnes Basin to prepare a GSP. And meanwhile, still this specter on the north of, there's going to be a battle trying to foist the old numbers on us, the alternative plan. And so that's the backdrop. And why the districts think it would be more sustainable, and what I'd urge DWR, and I think there's been other DWR representatives at the meetings, and DWR, I think, within its ranks is aware of these issues. They've been playing out on numerous forums, like I say, in the alternative plan here and in other areas. What is the definition of sustainable groundwater management? What fosters sustainable groundwater management? What would help it? Well, from Slough House's perspective in Omichome-Hartnell Water District, I'm not representing them, but when you go to these meetings, what you really want and what you see when you read some of the academic journals about SGMA is you want stakeholder buy-in. You want a trust and a faith in the process. And how do you get that from residents, landowners, constituents? You get that by having a representative form of governance, one that's responsive, one that's direct, not one that's distant, not one that perhaps has other interests and where stakeholders' voices aren't heard as much. And that's why the districts believe to get that buy-in from stakeholders, to make SGMA work and get landowners involved and to buy in and agree to being regulated, which might be on the horizon, right? Being assessed, having well fees imposed, the entity imposing them, to avoid lawsuits, avoid contention, and avoid enforcement and implementation problems. You want the regulated public to have faith and confidence in the regulator. If the regulator of these areas is Slough House and Omichome and the other GSAs in the Cosumnes, it's a lot more representative. These folks can vote for board members on Slough House, for Omichome-Hartnell Water District board members, if those are the ultimate GSAs, if there's not some other more cohesive JPA created in the future. But for a landowner right now who's on the north side of the river to have any effect on how they would be managed by the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority, you can look at that JPA agreement, and again, I mentioned, I think there's 15 board members. For them to actually vote and have that vote matter or be responsive when you're down in an unincorporated part of the county and your decisions are being made by representatives from Elk Grove, City of Sacramento, City of Folsom, Cal American Water. Really, your only representation is that you can vote for one of the 5 Sacramento County board members, and that one member of the Sacramento County board who can't unilaterally or appoint the other 6 or so positions to that board. But again, you see the point here. Your vote is heavily diluted. The only person that they can vote for is one person on the Board of Supervisors of Sac County, which is one of the, I don't know how many members, but that doesn't affect the City of Sacramento representative, the Elk Grove representative, the Folsom, the Cal-Am. So it's not very representative. So stakeholders are going to continue to have a lot of mistrust and distrust and not have that representative form. So I think that will hurt sustainable groundwater management because you won't get buy-in. And the second part, and that will conclude my comments, is because of the alternative plan, the statements that have been made, it seems apparent that, again, the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority wants to maintain the status quo and business as usual. SGMA is anything but business as usual and really changed the field. This has been a memo that has been difficult or not received by Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority, and granting the basin boundary modification could be a way to send a message, force everybody at the table and say, hey, you guys need to have GSPs on both sides of this and coordinate and work on it. Sac Central, drop the alternative plan ideas, start getting earnest about looking at these numbers and working with the southern part of the river, which really hasn't happened in my observation. And there's a lot of finger pointing, and it is what it is, but there can be no debate that Sac Central, again, I mentioned they've done a lot of worthwhile efforts and have a lot of data. They have more resources than Slough House Resource Conservation District. But what's amazed and alarmed me and has fueled some of the concerns of the stakeholders in the Cosumnes is that there hasn't been an information flow about what are these numbers that you're so concerned about? How were they derived? Are they legitimate? Why, when we look at a particular graph, does it look like your estimates and calculations presume that 3/4 of the Cosumnes River groundwater recharge will go to the South American basin and only 1/4 of the river's recharge will go to the Cosumnes subbasin? That's an issue that's been on the table for about 2 years now. There's been no outreach or attempts or meetings to try to disabuse us of that notion. There's just been letter writing campaigns on both sides, and there have been a lot of meetings, but we haven't really gotten to the earnest technical part where we can share those things. So again, the basin boundary modification will improve stakeholder buy-in on the Cosumnes and improve the chances of sustainable management. And I think it will shake things up even more than many other things have in this process to get all entities, including Sac Central, that in the district's opinion has been a little obstinate, to realize the alternative plan and these ideas of not getting together and dealing with these issues with the southern part of the county is not the way it's going to go. You've got to deal with them. And we can deal, and again, where the line is, and somebody said it, where the line is important. But I think we all understand that regardless of whether the line is 1 or 2 or 3 miles north or south, what's really important is the coordination among 2 neighboring subbasins, and anything can be accomplished through coordination agreements among neighboring subbasins. If there's any scientific, gray area as to where the line would be, and for many of these basins, give or take 5 miles, there's no physical reason to put that boundary in any particular place. As the presentation admitted, there's a lot of these were drawn on jurisdictional lines, and again, that's why Slough House believes that the jurisdictional request that would put both of those districts in 1 basin instead of 2 should be granted and made sense. And I appreciate you folks for listening to our comments, and we may follow up with written comments as well.
Thank you, Mr. Walter.
Tanya scans the audience.
We have one more comment before I call up the final commenter. I just want to check in with you to see if there's anyone else who would like to make a comment, and if you would, please to provide me with a speaker card. Any other comments? Okay. So our final commenter is Matt Parker from Siskiyou County Natural Resources. I always forget. I hold them and then I don't put them on. Regarding a basin boundary modification for Shasta. Thank you, Mr. Parker.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'm Matt Parker, Siskiyou County Natural Resources, representing the Siskiyou County Flood Control District, who is the GSA for the Shasta Valley Basin. I'm here to personally comment regarding the denial of the Shasta Valley Basin Boundary Modification. This morning, the board was approving a letter that will be submitted officially through the technical comment period. I'm here to basically summarize that letter and also be here in person to show our support in getting our boundary approved in whatever means necessary. We're disappointed and concerned and frankly frustrated by the denial. It's going to jeopardize the potential for quality sustainable management in the Shasta Valley watershed. For example, in the Shasta Valley, the lower 40 miles of the Shasta River, only 6.5 miles of the actual river is located in the basin. Because we're in salmon country, the surface water groundwater interaction piece is going to be the most scrutinized sustainability factor. So that minimal amount of river that we can address within our plan is going to be very difficult to comply with. Also, over 50% of the groundwater use in the watershed is outside of the current basin. So those 2 points alone are going to make it very, very challenging for our water users to build a quality GSP that will be, frankly, approved by DWR, and if not, will be, of course, we know the secondary results. This basin boundary modification has garnered wide community support, and as we know, a very contentious watershed. We have support from all of our water users, our stakeholders on both sides of the aisle. That right there should be a reason to modify the basin. The fact that it was denied, in fact, because and still we had this watershed-wide support, doesn't really show the spirit of SGMO. It's all about sustainable groundwater management, but yet because of tight language in the regs, we aren't able to expand into the volcanics. We look forward to working with DWR staff to support the technical data that we did provide and finding a means to modify the basin as we wish. We're going to follow up with more technical comments before the January 4th comment period. We would like to ask for a extension of that comment period to provide us and other basins the opportunity to better develop their comments so they can be successful. I'd also like to agree with the gentleman's comments earlier regarding DWR staff providing a written justification to all of the basins regarding why they were denied or approved for that matter. We've gotten a lot of calls, as well as you, I'm sure, from the stakeholders asking why our boundary was denied, our boundary proposal was denied, when in fact for the better portion of 6 months we were told we had a very good shot of having this approved. So we're frustrated in that for a year and a half we've been working on this. We've been repeatedly told over and over, yes, continue on. We know you'll set precedent by including volcanics in your basin. When you go back and look at 2003 Bulletin 118 version, and volcanics are considered a groundwater basin, and in fact one of the figures shows the basin that we asked to include as considered a basin, and now that it's not, that was a little confusing and disappointing. So we're frustrated with the process regarding this modification, but we look forward to working with the local staff and the state staff to get this boundary line approved. And thank you for your time.
Matt. Okay, one last check. Anyone interested in making a verbal comment before we close? Okay, for those of you on the webcast and those in the audience, anyone who provided verbal comments, if you have any written documentation that you would like to include in the written record, please give those to myself or my colleague Stephanie Horry. We're facilitators with the Consensus Building Institute. And for those of you online, as well as those in the audience, please do submit any comments by January 4th, 2019. I'd like to thank all of you for spending your afternoon here, for taking the time to make comments and be present at this meeting. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dane to make some closing remarks. Also, one reminder, if you're interested in looking at the draft modifications, we do have a nice poster here, and Vivian is available, who's sitting at the table over here with DWR. She's available if you'd like some help, if you'd like to receive a demo on how to make public comments. So please stay after and discuss either specifics about your basin boundary modification or learn more regarding a demo with Vivian. Thank you. Go ahead, Dane.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. And thank you again to everyone attended today and the people that tuned in on the webcast. So DWR will continue with this project on the anticipated timeline to get final results out in February. So again, we're here to try to address any questions you may have either at the end of the meeting today, or you can contact myself or perhaps some of the key representatives in the region office who are familiar with the project, and we're happy to, again, address any questions you may have. With that, just reflecting back again on the department's responsibilities under SGMA, we have quite a bit to do, and we're again going to be pushing towards getting out the alternative reviews early next year, and as mentioned in the presentation, is finishing up with the basin prioritization, hopefully getting things settled for local agencies so again they can stay focused on the impending deadlines to develop and submit their groundwater sustainability plans. So with that, I wish you all safe travels back home and a good rest of the day. Thank you.
A water effect rises to color in the state of California Department of Water Resources seal. It features a cloudy sky over a winding river cutting through a field, with mountains in the background and an outline of the state of California in the foreground.